Okay, joining me now, Jason Blazakis. He's professor of practice at the Middlebury Institute of International Studies. For 10 years, he led the State Department office that determines whether nations make that list. Jason, good to have you. I mean, first of all, just a practical question. What practical changes would result from placing Russia on this list that, for instance, other countries such as North Korea and Iran are on right now?
So it would put Russia in a really small category of pariah countries, joining Iran, North Korea, Syria, and Cuba to the state sponsor of terrorism list. But it would also, beyond the symbolism behind that, which every day we see the terrorism of the Russian Federation, Ukraine, it would actually have real impact. Heretofore, the Biden administration has primarily focused its sanctions tool on individuals and organizations, going after the oligarchs, sanctioning Putin, sanctioning Lavrov. This would be a country-oriented sanction, and it would have a significant impact because businesses that do business in Russia still would face reputational risk if they continue to do business in Russia. So I think we would see more businesses flee the Russian Federation. Very importantly, expand the aperture and the kinds of sanctions the U.S. could deploy against the Russian Federation. It would limit, for instance, dual-use exports that can be sent to the Russian Federation. And then perhaps most importantly, it would increase the cost of doing business for other countries doing business with the Russian Federation. They could be implicated in secondary sanctions, for instance.
So is that the key here? Is that the difference between the sanctions we've seen so far, and that it would penalize third parties, in effect, for doing business with Russia? So expand the net.
It would. It would also require the United States to push back against any Russian efforts to secure loans at the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, amongst other things. But it would be this risk calculation that other countries would have to actually perform. That is the most significant part of this. So absolutely, yes.
So we just put up on the screen what qualifies a nation for this list. You worked on this for 10 years at the State Department. Does Russia meet that standard?
They do meet the legal standard. It's a standard that's pretty simple, providing repeated support for acts of international terrorism. What does that mean practically for the Russian Federation and whether or not they meet the legal criteria? I've made the argument in the past that there are three elements that would put Russia back to that list. The first is Russia continues to provide sanctuary to a terrorist group known as the Russian Imperial Movement that the Trump administration designated as a specially designated global terrorist entity pursuant to EO 13224 back in April 2020. This is a group also that's engaged in violent activities in Ukraine. Second, the Russian Federation has a long past of political assassinations. The Litvinenko assassination in 2006, the attempted attack against Skripal in 2018. It's the same reason why North Korea essentially was added to the state sponsor of terrorism list in 2017 for those political assassinations. And finally, the Russian Federation, this is the great irony of this, provides sanctuary to an American neo-Nazi who's a leader of a neo-Nazi group known as the Base. And he lives in St. Petersburg, and the Base is a group that tried to carry out an attack in the United States in 2020.
I covered the Litvinenko poisoning, and it had been described to me as the first radiological terror attack because he was poisoned with a radioactive substance, which then poisoned other people, and that was the concern there, and spread out to dozens, hundreds of others. I do want to ask you this. When you hear the UN ambassador there say, well, in effect, Russia's already put itself on the list, what's your response to that administration position?
That's disappointing because the state sponsor of terrorism tag would actually have real impact. Just saying that Russia put itself on the list without actually having action behind those words, to me, is somewhat meaningless. And I do see on Capitol Hill, for instance, Democrats and Republicans actually joining the fray, calling for Russia to be added to the list. I saw Nancy Pelosi did that on Friday. Lindsey Graham did it as well last week. So there is this growing, I think, call for the Biden administration to do something about it because it would have real impact.
Yep, you're right. One of those rare bipartisan positions, particularly as it relates to Ukraine and Russia. Jason Blazakis, thanks so much.
Thanks, Jim. Take care.